When the doctor pulled out a 12-meter-long living worm from my body, I thought I was in a nightmare, but it was real, and worse, it wasn't alone. This isn't just a medical horror story. It's a journey through silence, shame, and survival. If you've ever ignored a strange symptom, this might be the story that changes everything. Subscribe now to hear the full story, and never miss a moment that could save your life. Because sometimes the scariest things are the ones we keep quiet. I don't remember the exact moment when I realized something was truly wrong. Maybe it was the third night I couldn't sleep because of the unbearable itching. Or maybe it was when I felt something foreign, something alive, shift ever so slightly inside me. Whatever it was, it didn't feel like my body anymore. The day it all changed started like any other. A cloudy Monday in Houston, Texas. I was standing under the pale hospital lights, on a cold examination table, with my legs in metal stirrups. Humiliation clung to my skin like humidity in July, and then I heard it. A gasp, a curse, and then the trembling voice of a nurse. "Doctor, it's moving." That was the moment my world cracked open. But to understand how I got there, to that surreal, terrifying place, we have to go back 6 weeks, back to when I was still pretending everything was fine. It started small, a bit of itching, a strange tingling sensation at night, easily dismissed. I was 26, healthy, single, working a corporate job, jogging in the mornings, drinking smoothies, trying to survive adulthood like the rest of the world. At first I blamed my laundry detergent, switched brands. No change. Then I blamed my underwear. Cotton only, washed twice, still no change. The itching turned into stinging, then burning, then something else, a crawling feeling, like static under the skin, like something writhing quietly, far beneath the surface. I didn't tell anyone, not my mother, not my coworkers, definitely not my ex, who still followed me on Instagram like some ghost who never fully left. There's a specific kind of silence that women learn to carry when it comes to our bodies, an expectation to suffer through discomfort politely, to not make a scene. I tried every over-the-counter remedy I could find. Creams, sprays, yogurt, tea tree oil. I even ordered something called feminine detox pearls from a wellness blog. Nothing worked. At night I would wake up gasping, sometimes in sweat, once with a strange wetness on the sheets, and a faint metallic smell that made my stomach turn. But even then, I didn't call a doctor. I just endured. Because going to a gynecologist wasn't just inconvenient, it was terrifying. The questions, the vulnerability, the coldness of being reduced to a chart, a body part, a mystery to be solved. Still, something shifted the third week. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed my reflection in the mirror. My face looked thinner, my eyes dull. I had lost 6 pounds without trying. My skin looked pale, almost waxy. That night something inside me twitched, not like gas, not like cramps. It was coordinated, deliberate, like a ripple. That's when fear overpowered shame. I made the call, scheduled an appointment, told myself it was probably just a yeast infection or maybe a stress response. But a small voice whispered otherwise. A part of me already knew. This was not normal. This was not benign. And the clinic was bright, modern, full of pastel posters with smiling women. The nurse was kind. The doctor, young and focused. Her name was Dr. Linda Morales. I remember the softness of her voice when she asked me to lie back. "It might feel a little cold," she said as she inserted the speculum. I nodded, braced myself. Seconds later, everything changed. A flicker of confusion on her face, then alarm, then horror. She stepped back, called a nurse. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel it. Something warm, something shifting, something moving. They brought in more staff. I saw gloves, tools, whispers turned into panicked instructions. I felt pressure, tugging. Then something wet. Then relief, a horrifying kind of relief. And then darkness. I must have passed out. I would wake up hours later in a hospital bed, the lights dim, my body exhausted. They told me they had extracted a living organism from inside me. A parasite, a worm, more than 12 meters long. It had been living inside me for God knows how long, and I'd had no idea. Or maybe I'd just been too afraid to listen. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. The real war was not against the creature that lived inside me, but the silence I'd allowed to grow around it, and the deeper truth I'd buried with it. The body has its own language. It speaks in pulses, in tightness, in heat and weight and ache. But we've learned to ignore it, especially when it whispers instead of screams. The first whisper came 3 days after I'd returned from work feeling unusually tired. That night, I noticed an itch, a dull one, right where it shouldn't be. I chalked it up to synthetic underwear or maybe a new brand of body wash. A week passed. The itch persisted. Grew bolder. Nights became restless. I'd shift in bed, scratch absent-mindedly, only to realize my nails had left faint red lines across my inner thighs. Still, I told myself, it's just irritation, just dryness, just a small thing. That's the lie we all start with. It's just. But just turned into discomfort, and discomfort became a nightly intrusion. Soon, I was waking up at 3 a.m. every night, as if something inside me stirred just enough to rouse me. The itching would return like a clockwork ghost, haunting the quiet hours between midnight and sunrise. I started setting a glass of ice water by the bed, not to drink, but to hold. The cold in my palm grounded me somehow, made me feel less like I was unraveling. By week 2, there were new symptoms, a low-grade fever, a throbbing ache in my pelvis. Strangest of all, a sensation like fluttering, deep inside, not pain, not pressure, just motion, barely there. Like a fish turning slowly in a pond, disturbing the stillness only for a second. I kept all of this to myself. Not out of carelessness, but out of conditioning. Women are taught to carry discomfort quietly. Pain is often minimized, dismissed as hormones or anxiety or just stress. Going to the doctor meant explaining something I couldn't even describe properly. What would I say? That I feel haunted by my own insides? That something moves when I'm still? I imagined the raised eyebrows, the referral to a therapist instead of a specialist. So I did what many do. I Googled. The internet is a cruel mirror when you're afraid. Every symptom had a dozen terrifying results: parasites, cancer, hormonal disorders, or worse, nothing. I dove into forums late at night, reading stories from strangers. Most threads ended with no answers, just speculation and silence. That silence was familiar, comforting even. It meant I didn't have to act yet. By week 3, something changed. I noticed blood on my underwear. Not menstrual blood, something darker, unfamiliar. There was a strange gelatinous residue that clung to the fabric. My heart pounded as I stared at it under the bathroom light. I sat on the toilet and cried. Quietly, not because of pain, but because I felt like a stranger to my own body. I kept thinking, if I go in and it's nothing, they'll think I'm overreacting. If I go in and it's something, what if it's already too late? I thought about my mother. She's the kind of woman who endured everything with stoicism. Childbirth, migraines, my father's long absences. She never complained, never cried. Whenever I fell sick as a child, she'd hand me soup and say, "Your body knows what to do. Let it fix itself." That voice echoed in my head every time I reached for the phone to call a doctor. Let it fix itself. Let it pass. Don't make a fuss. I stopped going to yoga, stopped seeing friends. I told them I was busy with work. The truth was, I no longer trusted myself to move without triggering the sensation. That odd shift. That low, slithering flutter in my abdomen. I began wearing loose clothes, ate less, avoided mirrors. Each day felt longer, each night heavier. And then came the moment. It was 2:14 a.m. I remember because I had checked my phone. I was lying on my side when I felt it. A distinct, unmistakable ripple, starting from deep inside my lower abdomen, curling downward, pressing outward. I froze. It wasn't gas. It wasn't muscle twitch. It was movement. Coordinated, slow, purposeful. My throat dried. I couldn't scream. I placed a hand on my stomach. Stillness returned, but the imprint of that movement remained, not just on my body, but in my mind. That morning, I made the call. A small OB/GYN clinic not far from my apartment had a cancellation. They fit me in the next day. The woman on the phone asked what my symptoms were. I stuttered. I think I might have a vaginal infection, or something, I'm not sure. She paused, then said kindly, "We'll take care of you. Just come in." And just like that, after 3 weeks of silence, the dam broke. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that the thing inside me wasn't finished. It had only just begun. I arrived at the clinic 10 minutes early. I always do that. Come early to things I dread, like it'll somehow lessen the pain of the experience. The waiting room smelled like lavender and disinfectant. Pastel-colored posters decorated the walls, featuring serene women with reassuring smiles. They didn't match how I felt. I sat in the far corner, knees tight together, fingers knotted in my lap. A television played a muted daytime talk show. No one else was there. Just me, and the weight of the unknown pressing hard on my chest. When the nurse called my name, I stood too fast. My legs trembled. I followed her through a narrow hallway lined with doors. The exam room was cold and too bright. She asked routine questions in a friendly tone, but my answers came in whispers. Yes, some itching. Yes, for a few weeks. No, no discharge. Well, maybe once. No fever, I think. She nodded and left. Then came silence. That sharp, fluorescent kind of silence you only hear in clinics. It buzzes just below your eardrums and makes you second-guess everything. I stared at the examination table, draped in crinkled paper, waiting for Dr. Morales. She entered with a clipboard and a calm smile, young, probably mid-30s. Her presence was both clinical and maternal, a strange combination, but it made me feel slightly safer. "I'm just going to take a look, okay?" she said softly. I nodded, laid back, stared up at the ceiling tiles. There's a particular vulnerability in that position. Feet in stirrups, exposed, waiting for judgment. Every woman knows it. I breathed through the cold pressure of the speculum, bracing myself for the discomfort, for the awkward silence. But the silence this time was different, too long, too still. And then, I heard it. A sharp inhale, a pause, the sound of latex gloves tightening around fingers. "Is everything okay?" I asked, barely audible. She didn't answer right away. Then she said slowly, "I'm going to call someone in to assist." My heart skipped. Something in her voice, controlled but edged with tension. I propped myself up on my elbows, but she gently urged me to lie back down. "We just need a closer look. Stay still." Footsteps. The sound of another pair of gloves snapping on. I could see the top edges of their heads over the paper curtain. I couldn't see their faces, but I could hear their breathing, shorter now, faster. Then I felt it, a tug, a pressure, a slow sliding sensation. Something was moving, not within me, but from me. Exiting, emerging. Dr. Morales murmured something I couldn't understand. Then a nurse gasped, "Jesus, it's alive, alive." The word hit me like a fist to the stomach. I tried to sit up again, but the nurse put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't move." Her voice was tight, almost panicked. There was more tugging. Something slick and wet brushed the inside of my thigh. I flinched. "It's still coming," someone whispered. I stared at the ceiling, trying to disassociate. I wanted to leave my body entirely. A warm liquid trailed down my skin. I imagined blood. No, mucus. Maybe both. The sensation of something long, rope-like, being pulled from the deepest parts of me was indescribable. It didn't stop. Inches turned into feet. The nurse backed away, holding a stainless steel tray, her eyes wide with disbelief. Still, it kept coming. Still, it lived. I saw a flash of white, no, pale pink, slithering past the edge of the paper sheet. Then black. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the lights were softer, not the blinding fluorescence of the clinic, but the muted glow of a hospital recovery room. The kind of light that tries not to disturb, that assumes you've been through something traumatic and wants to apologize. My body felt heavy. I blinked. My tongue was dry. There was a dull ache in my pelvis and a coolness around my thighs. I wasn't sure where I was for a moment. Then it came flooding back. The clinic, the table, the voices, something alive, being pulled from me. I turned my head slowly. Machines beeped softly beside me. An IV line snaked from my arm. I was wearing a hospital gown. A folded blanket sat neatly over my stomach, as if to hide what had just happened. A nurse noticed I was awake. She smiled gently, then left the room without saying anything. Moments later, Dr. Morales walked in. Her scrubs had changed. She looked tired, but calm, professional. She pulled a stool beside my bed and sat down. "Emily," she said, voice low, "you're safe. You passed out during the examination. We had you transported here right away." I tried to speak, but my mouth couldn't form words. She waited. Then came the words I'll never forget. "We removed a parasitic roundworm from your vaginal canal. It was approximately 12 meters in length." I stared at her. Surely I'd misheard. 12 meters? She continued slowly, as if translating from another language. "We believe it's an Ascaris lumbricoides, a type of intestinal roundworm, usually found in the digestive tract. But in rare cases, they migrate. Migrate. Like birds. Like something with a purpose." She paused, watching me. "We'll need to run further tests. It's possible there are more." That's when I turned my face to the wall. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't scream or ask why. I just shut down. Because what do you do when you learn that something that long, that alive, has been living inside of you? When the edges of your own body are no longer safe? I lay in silence for what felt like hours. Doctors came and went. Blood was drawn, scans scheduled, IV bags changed. I didn't speak. The truth was still too large to process. Too long. 12 meters. That's nearly 40 feet. Longer than a school bus. I kept imagining it. Coiled up inside me, feeding off me, moving while I slept, while I ate, while I worked. Had it been there when I laughed at brunch with friends? When I texted goodnight to my mother? When I walked alone at night and felt completely human? The horror wasn't just physical. It was existential. That evening, a nurse wheeled in a portable monitor. They were preparing for an abdominal scan. I couldn't look at the screen. I couldn't bear the idea of seeing another shape, another intruder, lurking in the soft tissue of my body. Dr. Morales stayed with me. She explained gently that roundworm infections often happen in areas with poor sanitation, that it may have entered my system during international travel. I remembered Thailand, the street food, the days I spent recovering from diarrhea in a beach hostel with a broken fan. I thought I'd gotten better, but apparently something else had stayed and grown. I asked a single question, the only one I could manage. How long was it inside me? She didn't answer right away. Then, it's hard to say. Possibly months. Maybe longer. Longer. The room shrank. The ceiling seemed to lean in. I felt contaminated. Not just invaded, but violated by my own biology. How hadn't I noticed? Why hadn't I listened sooner? Guilt wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I had ignored the signs. I had let this happen. But deep down, I knew it wasn't negligence. It was fear. Fear of being dismissed, of being told it was just stress, of being seen as overreacting. So I had chosen silence. And in that silence, something monstrous had thrived. An instant I stared at the ceiling, not the ceiling, numb. Even after it was removed, I could still feel it, like phantom pain, like the echo of something that had once belonged to me. But that wasn't true. It had never belonged. And yet it had lived in me, fed from me, hidden in the dark places I had refused to examine. That night, as the morphine wore off and the quiet returned, I whispered to no one, "What else is still inside me?" The next morning, Dr. Morales returned to my room with a folder pressed tightly against her chest. Her eyes were soft, but something in her posture had shifted, more alert, more cautious. She sat beside me, adjusted the bed slightly so I could sit up, and opened the folder without speaking. I braced myself. "Emily," she began, "we've confirmed that the organism we removed was Ascaris lumbricoides, a parasitic roundworm. The size and condition were remarkable. We rarely see one that large in this part of the world." Her words sounded like they belonged in a documentary, not a conversation about my body. I said nothing. I was still trying to reconcile the fact that a creature longer than a garden hose had lived inside me, and hadn't come alone. She continued, "This type of worm typically enters the body through contaminated food or water, often in areas with poor sanitation. Once inside, the eggs hatch in the intestines. The larvae then migrate through the bloodstream, traveling to the lungs before being swallowed again, returning to the gut as adults." She paused to let that settle. It didn't. "So, it was in my lungs?" I whispered. "Possibly, yes, at one point. But that phase passes quickly. What's unusual is its migration into the reproductive tract. That doesn't typically happen unless there's a fistula or a rupture between organs. It may have burrowed through weakened tissue or found a path through pressure and inflammation." I stared down at my hands. They were trembling. "And it was alive the whole time?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yes," she said gently, "feeding, growing, releasing waste inside your body. It's likely been there for months, maybe longer." She didn't say it to shame me, but it landed like shame anyway. My mind drifted back to Thailand, the sticky air, the street vendor selling skewers of grilled pork, the way I had squatted on a beach with food poisoning, barely coherent, assuming it would pass. I had thought I recovered. I had even posted a selfie the next morning, sunburned, smiling, holding a coconut. The worm must have been there already, quiet, patient, settling in. "We performed some imaging last night," Dr. Morales continued. "A full-body CT scan and abdominal ultrasound. We wanted to ensure there were no internal complications." She opened the folder to reveal several glossy images, grayscale swirls of my insides. She pointed to a shadow on the scan. "There," she said. "That's your small intestine." She tapped again just beside it. "And these are additional parasitic forms, smaller, less developed, but alive. My chest tightened. How many? 4, she said. 4 more, still inside me, still feeding, still waiting. It felt like a betrayal, as if everything I had endured was only the beginning, as if the 12-meter nightmare had just been a messenger. I tried to breathe, but the air in the room had thickened. Dr. Morales leaned forward. We're going to schedule surgery, a laparotomy. It's the best way to remove them safely. Medication alone might not be enough at this stage. Surgery, again. My body opened, again. But I didn't protest. I just nodded. Because somewhere deep inside I had known. The crawling hadn't stopped. The dreams hadn't faded. My body still held secrets, and they were not done revealing themselves. She squeezed my hand before she left. You're doing the right thing, and we're going to take care of this, all of it. I watched the door close behind her. Then I stared at the ceiling, letting the truth settle like ash in my lungs. There was more inside me. There had always been more, and it wasn't finished. The following afternoon, I met with Dr. Morales in a consultation room just down the hallway. The walls were painted a muted sage green, as if trying to soothe the conversations that happened inside them. She brought in a tablet this time, already loaded with my scan images, blood results, and surgical recommendations. There was a silence between us, not uncomfortable but heavy. Emily, she began, we need to talk about the risks. I nodded, slowly. The 4 smaller parasites we found during the scan. They're located in the small intestine. One of them, here, she pointed to a grainy area on the screen, is pressing against the intestinal wall. It's begun to cause inflammation. If it continues, it could lead to a perforation. Perforation. The word echoed in my ears. If the intestine ruptures, she continued, you would be at immediate risk of peritonitis. That's a severe, life-threatening infection of the abdominal cavity. It would require emergency surgery and a much longer recovery. Her voice was clinical but not cold, firm but not frightening. She was giving me the truth, wrapped in the compassion of someone who had delivered it too many times before. Have there been symptoms? She asked gently. I hesitated. Yes, I finally whispered. The bloating, the twitching. I thought it was nerves or stress, but now, I'm not sure. She nodded. That's common. Parasites don't always make themselves known right away. They're opportunistic, quiet. They learn to mimic background discomfort, things we dismiss as just digestion or just fatigue. I felt exposed all over again. How long had I ignored my own body? How long had I mistaken warning signs for inconveniences? Dr. Morales placed the tablet down and folded her hands. I want you to know, she said, this didn't happen because you were careless. It happened because our culture teaches people, especially women, not to speak up about their bodies, to minimize pain, to push through symptoms until it's almost too late. My throat tightened. She was right. I had grown up in a world that praised endurance, that called pain normal, that laughed off discomfort as overreaction, and so I had learned to wait, too long. And she leaned forward slightly. There's something else I want to share with you, not as your doctor, but as a person who's seen this pattern before. I looked up. This could have been caught earlier, she said softly. A routine stool test, or a pelvic ultrasound, even just a thorough blood panel, might have picked up anomalies, but we don't always encourage people to do those things unless they're already in crisis. She paused. Emily, when was your last full physical? I blinked, searched my memory. Maybe 4 years ago, I admitted. She didn't judge me. She simply nodded. Many people don't realize that internal parasites, especially ones like Ascaris, don't always cause dramatic symptoms at first. Early signs can be as vague as bloating, fatigue, or even a mild cough. That's why annual checkups are so important. Not just when something feels wrong, but to make sure it isn't. And I let her words settle in my mind. It wasn't just about this parasite. It was about the years I had chosen silence over discomfort, privacy over prevention. A worm had grown inside me, but shame had grown alongside it, quietly, systematically. And it didn't have to be this way. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. I signed the consent forms with steady hands but a racing heart. That night, alone in my hospital bed, I stared at the dark corners of the ceiling, where the shadows seemed deeper than before. I thought about the things we carry inside us, things we ignore until they begin to take over. Not just parasites, but memories, fears, guilt, patterns we inherit without question. I wondered how many others lived like this, how many dismissed their body's quiet warnings, how many second-guessed themselves into danger. The nurse came in at midnight to check my vitals. I smiled politely, said nothing. But inside, something had shifted, not fear, not dread. Something closer to resolve. Because now I knew. This didn't have to go this far. The operating room was cold, not just the kind of cold you feel on the skin, but a cold that seeps into the marrow, as if the walls themselves are trying to keep death at bay. I was wheeled in at dawn. The hallway lights passed above me in intervals, like slow, blinking stars. I couldn't see the faces of the people around me, just gloved hands, scrubbed caps, soft voices that didn't belong to anyone I knew. The anesthesiologist leaned over gently, adjusting the fourth. "We'll take good care of you," he said. I wanted to believe him. As the drugs began their quiet descent into my veins, I watched the ceiling dissolve into blur. I remember thinking, not of death, but of silence. How terrifying it is when your own body hides things from you. How easily it becomes a stranger. Then, nothing. It told me later that the procedure lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of searching, cutting, pulling, rinsing, stitching. Dr. Morales led the team. The incision was clean, horizontal across my lower abdomen, just below the navel. They opened me up carefully, peeling back the layers of tissue like pages in a story they hadn't written. Inside they found all 4 parasites, alive. 3 were coiled loosely within the small intestine, sluggish but still feeding. They were extracted with relative ease, flushed into specimen containers, preserved for pathology. But the fourth was different. It had burrowed higher than expected, slipping past the intestinal wall, wriggling up toward the liver. It was long, thinner than the others, older perhaps, but more aggressive. Its head had already begun to push into hepatic tissue, seeking nutrients beyond the gut. One more day, one more night, and it could have perforated the liver. One surgeon later told me, off the record, that I had been within 24 hours of internal hemorrhaging, that if I'd gone home instead of agreeing to surgery, I might not have woken up. But I did wake up. And when I did, the pain was immediate, blunt, all-encompassing, blooming outward from my abdomen like heat from a furnace. A nurse leaned over me. Morphine, a whisper, a cool hand on my forehead. The room blurred again, light bled at the edges of everything. But the pain remained, a reminder, a footprint left behind. My body felt empty, but not in a peaceful way. No, it felt ransacked, violated, scraped clean. I wanted to scream but had no words. I wanted to cry but felt too hollow. The surgeons had removed the worms. The visible threat was gone, but in its place was something harder to define. A question. If my body had allowed something like this to grow inside me, what else had it hidden? What other truths had I buried so deep that even I couldn't recognize them anymore? And later that evening, Dr. Morales stood by my bedside. "You were lucky," she said softly. "We found the last one just in time." She didn't smile. She didn't try to comfort. She told the truth. And in that truth was a strange kind of grace. I nodded. Barely. My lips were too dry to speak. But inside I was screaming. Not at her. Not at the worms. At myself. Because I had lived with these things. Shared meals with them. Laughed, worked, slept. While something inside me stole inches of life. One silent moment at a time. It hadn't happened in a single violent moment. No. It had happened slowly. One ignored symptom. One canceled appointment, one rationalized excuse after another, and that somehow made it worse. The night after surgery, I woke from a nightmare with tears already on my cheeks. In the dream, I was back on the exam table, but this time no one came, no nurse, no doctor. Only the sound of something squirming deep inside me, too far to reach. When I looked down, my stomach was moving, pulsing, stretching, trying to birth something I couldn't name. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the IV line tugging at my arm as I sat up too fast. The heart monitor beeped erratically. A nurse rushed in, calm and composed, guiding me back down, checking the machines. I apologized. She smiled. "It happens." But her eyes were tired. She had seen this before. Then in that moment, I realized something chilling. This was no longer just a physical recovery. It had become something else. Something I would carry in dreams, in silence, in the spaces where shame makes its home. The nightmares didn't stop after the surgery. If anything, they sharpened. In sleep, my body betrayed me again and again, rewinding time, replaying scenes I never remembered living. Sometimes it was the sensation of something moving just beneath my skin. Other times I was back in that sterile room, legs in stirrups, with no doctor, no nurse, just silence, and a feeling of being watched from the inside. I began to fear rest. Sleep no longer meant peace. It meant vulnerability. And for the first time in my adult life, I found myself afraid of the dark. Dr. Morales noticed the changes. She stopped talking about discharge dates and instead brought up something else. "Emily," she said one afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, "I think you should speak with someone." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. My body had been cleansed, but my mind was still crawling. I started therapy the following week. Her name was Rachel. Mid-40s, gentle eyes, no clipboard, just presence. She didn't ask about the worms in our first session. She asked about the silence. "When did you first learn to ignore what your body was telling you?" The question stunned me. It sat in the air like a ticking clock. I opened my mouth, then closed it, and then, slowly, haltingly, came the memory. I was 17, in a boy's car, too drunk to make good decisions. He didn't ask for permission, and I didn't fight, not because I didn't want to, but because I froze. And afterward I said nothing. Not to my mother, not to my friends, not even to myself. I told myself it wasn't real, that it wasn't that bad, that if I could pretend it didn't happen, maybe it would disappear, but it didn't. It stayed, inside, like something parasitic. And Rachel called it dissociation, a coping mechanism, a survival response. You learn to separate from your body so you don't have to feel what it remembers. It made sense. The worms had been real, biological, tangible, but so had the other intrusions, the ones without teeth or tails, the ones that whispered, "You're overreacting," the ones that taught me to be quiet. That realization, more than any incision, any scalpel, cut the deepest. Because for all those years, I hadn't just let a parasite grow inside me. I had let guilt grow, and shame, and silence. They had wrapped themselves around my decisions, fed off my fear, kept me from seeking help, because I thought pain was my responsibility to bear alone. Until it was never just about the worms. They were only the most visible part of what had been living in me. What terrified me now was the invisible, the emotional organisms, the quiet violations, the things I never gave language to. In one of our later sessions, Rachel said something I wrote down and never forgot. The things we don't name own us. The things we hide grow. It explained everything. Why I had waited. Why I had convinced myself the twitching was normal. Why I didn't walk into that clinic until something was already slithering out of me. I didn't want to believe my body had betrayed me, but in truth, I had abandoned it first. Recovery was no longer about incisions healing. It was about re-entering my own body. Learning to hear it again, to trust its messages, to sit with discomfort without ignoring it. It was about taking the mirror off the wall and not looking away. And one night, weeks later, I stood in front of that mirror, naked. I traced the scar across my abdomen with a fingertip, a small curved line, pale pink, smooth. It no longer disgusted me. It marked the line between ignorance and awareness, between silence and speech, between survival and resurrection. I wasn't cured, I wasn't stronger, but I was no longer numb, and that, I decided, was a kind of victory. Healing didn't arrive in a flash of revelation. It came slowly, in pieces, in soft mornings where my body didn't ache, in moments where I no longer winced at my own reflection, in the steady unraveling of silence. After weeks of recovery, I sat down at my laptop for the first time, hands hovering over the keyboard. I hadn't opened my email since the hospital. I wasn't ready to face the world, or questions, or pity. But that day was different. I didn't want to explain myself. I wanted to tell the truth. Not to doctors, not to therapists, not to my mother. To someone like me, someone who might be waiting too long to listen to their body. Then the blog post started simply. 3 months ago, something was moving inside me. Not metaphorically, literally. A living, breathing, feeding organism had made a home in my body. It was over 12 meters long. I thought I was just tired, just bloated, just anxious. But what I had really been was silent, and that silence nearly killed me. I wrote for hours, not to be dramatic, not to be brave, to be honest. I wrote about the shame, the years of ignoring pain, the fear of being dismissed, the way I had convinced myself that discomfort was normal, expected, and I wrote about the worm. In detail, the weight of it, the invasion, the surgery, the nightmares, the way it mirrored things I had buried long before the parasite ever entered my body. I didn't expect anyone to read it. But within 24 hours, the blog had 3,000 views. By the end of the week, it had 50,000. Women began messaging me. From everywhere. A nurse from Arizona wrote, I've had cramps for months and kept telling myself it's nothing. Your post made me schedule an appointment today. A woman in her 60s from Maine said, I was too embarrassed to talk about the pain I've had. But after reading your story, I told my doctor for the first time. Even younger girls, barely in college, wrote, I've been scared to go to a gynecologist. Now I'm not. The messages poured in. Some were long, others just said thank you. I read every single one, and for the first time, I didn't feel like what happened to me was just trauma. It was transformation. But then came Rosa. She found me through the blog's contact form. Her email was brief. My name is Rosa. I'm 62. I read your story. I think something similar may be happening to me, but I've been too scared to go in. I don't know who else to tell. I wrote back immediately. We talked on the phone the next evening. Her voice was soft, raspy with age and anxiety. She'd been experiencing lower abdominal pain for months. She thought it was gas, then maybe menopause, then maybe nothing. I kept thinking, what if the doctor laughs? She said. I told her they wouldn't. And then just as softly she whispered, but what if they find something? That fear, I knew it too well. I offered to go with her. She lived only an hour away. She hesitated, then said yes. The clinic smelled the same as I remembered. Lavender, antiseptic, pastel pamphlets. Rosa held my hand in the waiting room. She was shaking. Whatever happens, I said. You've already done the hard part. You showed up. She nodded, eyes shining. They called her in. I waited. It felt like years. When she came out, she looked pale, but steady. They found something, she said. I took her hand again. It's small, she added, but real, and they're treating it early. She smiled, a quiet smile, and in it, I saw myself just a few months earlier, but finally stepping into the light. And after that, I started speaking publicly, first at women's health workshops, then in podcasts, eventually at a small community health fair where I stood in front of 50 strangers and told them about the day a living thing slid out of me and changed my life. I didn't use medical slides. I didn't use statistics. I told them the story, not for shock, not for sympathy, for solidarity. I told them about the twitching, the heat, the denial. I told them about the shame of not knowing your own body and the power of reclaiming it. I told them what I wish someone had told me. Your body is not your enemy. It doesn't betray you. It begs you to listen. And the longer you ignore it, the harder it has to scream. When one woman came up after that talk, tears in her eyes, she didn't say much, just hugged me. Another woman emailed me a week later. I scheduled my first exam in 15 years. I think you might have saved my life. I cried when I read it, not out of pride, but because I finally believed it wasn't all for nothing. Pain healing, I realized, isn't about perfection. It's about participation. It's about showing up, even if you're afraid, speaking up, even if your voice shakes, and choosing to live in your body, even when it feels unfamiliar. Now I keep a journal, not for dreams or goals, but for gratitude. Every morning I write down one sentence, something like, today, my stomach is quiet, or I slept 8 hours without fear, or even just, I exist, and that is enough. The scar on my belly is still there, faint, soft, curved like a comma, not a full stop, not an ending, just a pause, before something better. The invitation came on a Thursday. It arrived as an email from a medical association I had never heard of, with a subject line that simply read, "We'd like you to speak." I almost deleted it. I thought it was spam, some generic mass request or an automated list I'd ended up on after sharing my story online, but something told me to open it, just in case. The message was brief but personal. They had read my blog. They had followed the response. They were hosting an annual medical conference in Denver focused on rare parasitic cases and patient advocacy. And they wanted me to speak, not as a scientist, not as a doctor, but as someone who had lived through the kind of thing they studied from a safe distance. I stared at the screen, frozen. Me? Speak at a medical conference? I wasn't a professional. I wasn't even sure I was healed. I was just a woman who'd survived something strange and terrifying, a woman who happened to write about it. But after a full day of indecision, I typed out a simple reply, yes, I'd be honored. And so, 2 months later, I found myself standing backstage in a Denver hotel ballroom, watching rows of physicians, students, and researchers settle into velvet chairs. The room was full. The projector glowed quietly behind me. A moderator was finishing her introduction. reading the last lines of my blog aloud. Her name is Emily Rodriguez, and her story reminds us that medicine is not only about what we treat, but about who we listen to. Then came the applause, then the silence, then me. I walked onto the stage, heart pounding, not out of fear, but because I knew what was at stake. Not my reputation, not my performance, something deeper. I looked out across the room. It was a sea of white coats and gray hair, notebooks and name tags. Some looked curious, others skeptical. One woman in the front row was already dabbing her eyes. I didn't use slides. I didn't recite stats. I told them a story, my story. I told them about the itching, the silence, the rationalizations, the shame. I told them how long it took to be seen, to be taken seriously, to be heard not as a body, but as a person. I described the exam table, the gasp, the moment something moved inside me and I realized I wasn't imagining it. I told them about the worm, about the surgery, about the feeling of something leaving me, only to discover that the hardest part wasn't extraction, it was recovery. I told them about the second invasion, the emotional one, the one that doesn't show up on scans. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth. And when I finished, the room was silent again, not out of indifference but reverence, a silence full of thought, of recalibration. Then came the applause, not polite, not obligatory, full, prolonged, meaningful. People lined up after the session to speak with me. Some asked questions, others just thanked me. A medical student told me she was reconsidering how she approached every patient complaint now. A doctor from California asked if I would let him use my story in his university lectures. I nodded, overwhelmed, and quietly excused myself to the restroom. I locked the door, leaned against the tiled wall, and let the tears come. Not because I was sad, but because something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just heard, but useful. My pain had turned into purpose, and I wasn't alone in the room anymore. The letter arrived 5 days after the conference, tucked among bills and circulars in my tiny metal mailbox. It was cream-colored, thick, the kind of paper that felt deliberate. My name was handwritten in blue ink, no return address, no email, no sender's name, just Emily Rodriguez in delicate, slightly slanted cursive. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Something about it felt sacred, like it had traveled a long way, not in miles but in years, in hesitation, in silent prayers that were never spoken aloud. I opened it slowly, as if rushing might break it. Inside there was one page, lined, written with the same blue pen. The handwriting was older, neat but wavering at parts. I sat down on my couch and began to read. Dear Emily, I watched your talk. I don't know how I even found it. Some article online, a comment thread, a whisper of something that led me to you. I want to thank you, but not for the reasons most people will. Not just for your strength, not for your honesty, not for surviving something that most of us couldn't imagine. I want to thank you for naming it, not the worm, not the parasite, but the silence. Because I've lived with one too, not the kind that curls in your intestines, but the kind that curls in your memories. I am 71 years old. When I was 20, something happened to me, something no one believed. I kept it to myself. I married. I had children. I buried it under routines, casseroles, and birthday parties. But it stayed. I began having pain in my abdomen. Sharp, random. I went to the doctor. They told me it was stress, or my uterus, or hormones. Once, a nurse asked if I was imagining it, so I stopped going. I lived like that for 30 years. I only went back to a clinic when I started passing blood. By then, it was too late. I had to have part of my colon removed. The doctors said it was advanced parasitic damage from years of exposure, probably something I'd picked up as a girl on the farm. I nodded. I thanked them, but I knew I'd let something stay too long, not just in my body, but in my silence. At this point, I stopped reading. Not because I couldn't, but because I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling. I let the paper fall gently to my lap. I closed my eyes. Somewhere this woman, this unnamed witness, had carried the same burden I had. The same guilt, the same second-guessing. But she had done it for decades longer. Through marriages, through aging, through motherhood and menopause, she had lived entire lifetimes with a secret gnawing at her health. And now, she was writing to me. Not to confess, not to unburden, but to say, I see you, and I know you see me. I picked up the letter again. I'm not writing for pity. I have made peace with what happened, but when I watched you speak, something in me softened. a thread untangled. I remembered my younger self. I imagined her hearing your words. I imagined what would have changed if someone like you had spoken back then. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. I hope you never stop telling your story. I hope you never stop reminding others that silence is a kind of parasite too. With gratitude, a woman who waited too long, that was it. No name, no address, no request for response, just closure. But not the kind that seals a story, the kind that opens it. Because now I understood, this story no longer belonged to me. It never had. It belonged to every woman who had waited too long, to every body dismissed, to every pain explained away, to every whisper that should have been a scream. I folded the letter slowly, placed it in a drawer beside my bed. I would keep it, not for proof, but for remembrance. It would be my reminder that the most powerful stories don't end when we survive. They begin when we are finally heard. It's been a year, 12 months since the first ripple of movement beneath my skin. 12 months since my body sounded an alarm I could no longer ignore. 12 months since I chose to stop pretending and start listening. There are still days I hesitate before calling a doctor. Still moments where I flinch at phantom aches, wondering, is it happening again? But most days, I live in a body I trust. That in itself is a kind of miracle. Because for years, I didn't. For years, my body was a place of question marks, of shame, of minimized pain and dismissed instincts, a vessel I carried but did not claim, until something alien grew inside me and demanded that I pay attention. What started as a medical emergency became a reckoning, a confrontation with silence, a return to the very core of what it means to be whole, not perfect, not unbroken, but aware. I often think about the moment in the clinic, the second Dr. Morales saw it moving, the hush in the room, the tension in the air, the slow, slippery revelation of a thing I had lived with unknowingly. That moment wasn't just the climax of a health scare, it was the beginning of something else, awakening. There is a myth we tell ourselves that strength means pushing through pain, that real adults know how to tough it out, that if it doesn't kill us, it doesn't need attention. But I've learned that real strength lives in the opposite direction. It lives in stillness, in quiet awareness, in the courage to say, something isn't right. I don't tell my story because it's unusual. I tell it because, in its core, it's not. Maybe not the worm, maybe not the surgery, but the waiting, the denial, the fear of being dismissed, that's universal. Too many people, especially women, are taught to distrust their own bodies, to label discomfort as weakness, to believe that unless blood is pouring or bones are broken, we are simply overreacting. We're not, and I speak now not from a place of expertise, but from a place of experience. And if there's one thing I hope this story leaves behind, it's this. Go to the doctor, ask the questions, request the tests. Even if you're embarrassed, even if you're unsure, even if a small voice in your head says, maybe I'm just being paranoid, listen to that voice. It's not paranoia, it's intuition. And your body is not a machine to be ignored until it breaks. It is a living story, full of signals, wisdom, and memory. It speaks to you, even when you've stopped speaking to it. I look back now and think about all the moments I dismissed something small, the itching, the night sweats, the twitch in my abdomen. Each one was a whisper. Each one was a chance to listen, but I didn't, until I had no choice. If you're hearing this now and something in your body feels off, let this be your permission slip. Let this be the voice that answers back to your quiet doubt and says, you are allowed to ask for help. Schedule that checkup, book the screening, say the thing you've been afraid to name. It doesn't make you dramatic, it makes you alive. And alive is something I no longer take for granted. A scar on my stomach is small now, faded, but I see it every day, and every day I thank it for being the place where silence ended, where I re-entered my own body, where I chose to come home to myself. People sometimes ask me if I regret sharing my story, if it was too much, too graphic, too vulnerable. And to them I say, what lives in darkness thrives, but what we name, what we dare to bring into the light, we can heal. So no, I don't regret it. Because every message I've received, every woman who said, your story gave me the courage to ask for help, is a reminder that this was never just about me. This is bigger than one parasite, bigger than one diagnosis, bigger than fear. This is about reclaiming our bodies, our stories, our voices. You don't have to wait for the scream. You can respond to the whisper. You can listen now. And that might just save your life. If this story stirred something in you, an old fear, a forgotten symptom, or just a quiet nudge to listen more closely to your own body, don't ignore it. And if you've ever lived through something similar, your voice matters too. Share it. Drop a comment below. I read every one. And if you found this story powerful or eye-opening, hit that subscribe button, because the next story might be the one you, or someone you love, needs to hear.